The stagecoach lurched violently as Katherine Sullivan pressed her gloved hand against the frosted window, watching snow swallow the landscape in thick white curtains that made her wonder if she had made the worst decision of her life. February 1878 had arrived with a vengeance across the Colorado Territory, and she was riding directly into its frozen heart, toward a man whose letters had promised warmth, security, and something she had stopped believing existed after losing everything back in Philadelphia. Her father's debts had stripped away her comfortable life, her mother's death following 6 months later as if grief itself had physical weight, and Katherine found herself at 23 with nothing but an education that meant little when landlords demanded rent and grocers needed payment. The advertisement had seemed like fate when it appeared in the newspaper. A rancher in Fort Collins seeking a wife, someone educated and resilient, someone willing to build a life in the Colorado Territory, where winters were harsh, but possibilities stretched as wide as the prairie sky. She clutched his last letter in her hands, the paper soft from repeated readings during the 3-week journey west. Kade Kendrick wrote with surprising eloquence for a cattleman, describing his ranch, his dreams of expansion, his loneliness in words that felt honest rather than desperate. He had lost his own family to illness, understood the hollow ache of empty rooms, and sought someone who could see past survival toward something resembling happiness. They had exchanged 7 letters total, which struck Katherine as simultaneously too few to make such a monumental decision, and more communication than many mail-order marriages involved. His photograph showed a man in his late 20s with serious eyes beneath the brim of a worn hat, strong features that suggested both determination and kindness, though photographs could lie as easily as words. The other passenger in the coach, a traveling salesman named Morris, had talked incessantly for the first 2 days before the weather turned brutal enough to silence even his relentless chatter. Now he huddled beneath a buffalo robe, occasionally glancing at Katherine with what might have been pity or concern. The driver had shouted something about the blizzard worsening an hour ago, his voice barely audible through the howling wind that rocked the coach like a ship in stormy seas. Katherine wondered if they would reach Fort Collins at all, or if her journey would end frozen in a snowdrift, her story concluding before it properly began. The horses struggled forward with admirable determination, their breath creating steam clouds that dissipated instantly in the driving snow. Katherine could feel the cold seeping through the coach walls despite her wool traveling dress, thick cloak, and the blanket she had wrapped around her legs. Her trunk, strapped to the coach roof, contained everything she owned in the world, which amounted to a modest collection of clothing, her mother's jewelry, a few precious books, and the kind of hope that felt both foolish and necessary. She had written to Kade 3 weeks ago with her expected arrival date, trusting the letter would reach him in time, trusting he would meet the stage as promised, trusting that the future she imagined might bear some resemblance to reality. When the coach finally lurched to a stop, Katherine initially thought they had gotten stuck, another delay in a journey that had tested every ounce of her patience and resolve. But then the door opened, admitting a blast of wind and snow that stole her breath, and the driver's weathered face appeared in the opening. "Fort Collins, miss," he announced, shouting to be heard over the storm. "Such as it is in this God-forsaken weather. Your man is waiting." Katherine's heart hammered against her ribs as she gathered her carpetbag and allowed the driver to help her down from the coach. Her boots sank immediately into snow that reached mid-calf, and the wind tore at her cloak with vindictive strength. Through the white chaos, she could make out the vague shapes of buildings lining what must be the main street, their lit windows offering golden promises of warmth and shelter. The driver was already untying her trunk, and Morris had climbed out behind her, hurrying toward one of the buildings without farewell. Then she saw him, a tall figure materializing from the blizzard like something conjured from ice and determination. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a hat pulled low, but she recognized the set of his shoulders from the photograph. The way he moved with purposeful confidence, despite the storm trying to knock everyone sideways. When he reached her, stopping just a few feet away, Katherine found herself looking up into eyes that were darker than she expected, brown like rich earth, currently studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed despite her layers of clothing. Katherine Sullivan. His voice carried clearly despite the wind, deep and steady. Yes. Her own voice sounded smaller than she intended, and she tried again. Kade Kendrick. Something shifted in his expression, tension she had not realized he carried easing from his features. I was not certain you would come. The weather has been threatening for days. He glanced at the driver who had set her trunk in the snow. Thank you, Caleb. Get yourself to the hotel and warm up. The driver tipped his hat and climbed back onto the coach, clearly eager to reach shelter and hot coffee. Kade bent to lift Katherine's trunk as if it weighed nothing, settling it on one broad shoulder before offering her his free arm. The house is not far. Can you walk, or should I arrange something? Pride made Katherine straighten despite her exhaustion and cold. I can walk. His mouth quirked in what might have been approval or amusement, difficult to tell with his face half hidden by his collar and hat. Then, let us get you out of this storm. Winter came early this year and shows no sign of loosening its grip. They moved through the blizzard together, Katherine's hand gripping his arm for stability as much as guidance. The street was nearly deserted, sensible people having sought shelter when the storm intensified. Snow had drifted against building fronts in sculptural waves, and the wind created strange whistling sounds as it whipped between structures. Katherine's face went numb within minutes, her breath coming in gasps that the cold turned painful. Just when she thought she might collapse from the combination of exhaustion and freezing temperatures, Kade guided her around a corner and up steps to a house that looked solid and well-maintained despite the storm's assault. He opened the door with his free hand, ushering her inside ahead of him before following with her trunk. The warmth hit Katherine like a physical force, making her skin tingle and her eyes water. She stood dripping melted snow on the wooden floor, taking in her surroundings with overwhelmed senses. The front room was simply furnished but clean, with a large fireplace that currently crackled with healthy flames. A braided rug covered the center of the floor, and curtains framed windows now lashed with snow. Through an open doorway, she could see what appeared to be a kitchen, and a staircase against one wall presumably led to bedrooms above. Kade set her trunk down and closed the door firmly against the storm, before turning to face her properly for the first time. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair slightly damp with melted snow, and studied her with those serious eyes that seemed to notice everything. Katherine became suddenly aware of how she must appear, bedraggled from weeks of travel, her carefully pinned hair in disarray, her face probably red from wind and cold. She wanted to say something intelligent, to make a good first impression despite the circumstances, but found herself speechless under his regard. "You must be frozen clear through," he said finally, his voice gentler than before, "and exhausted from the journey. Let me show you where you can warm up and rest." He hesitated, then added with careful formality, "I prepared the upstairs bedroom for you. The house has two. I will sleep down here until after we are married proper if that suits you." Relief flooded through Katherine so intensely, it weakened her knees. She had wondered, during the long journey, what expectations might greet her, whether Kade would consider their arrangement sufficient without additional ceremony or time to become acquainted. His consideration for propriety, even in these unusual circumstances, made her feel marginally safer in this strange new situation. "Thank you. That is very considerate," he nodded, seeming relieved himself. "I know this is not how anyone imagines starting a marriage. You coming all this way to a stranger, me waiting for someone I have only known through letters. I thought we might take a few days to get acquainted before we speak with Reverend Mitchell, unless you prefer otherwise." "A few days would be welcome," Katherine admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Now that she was finally here, finally warm and standing before the man she had agreed to marry, the full weight of what she had done crashed over her. She had traveled halfway across the continent to marry someone she did not know, based on letters and hope and lack of alternatives. It was reckless and desperate, and standing here in his house, she felt the reality of it settling into her bones alongside the cold. Kade's expression softened as if he sensed her spiraling thoughts. "You are safe here, Katherine. I know that probably sounds hollow right now, words from a stranger, but I meant what I wrote in my letters. I am looking for a partner, someone to build a life with, not a servant or something worse. We will figure this out together, at whatever pace makes sense." The sincerity in his voice steadied something inside her. Katherine managed a small smile, the first genuine one since leaving Philadelphia. "I appreciate that, and I meant what I wrote in my letters too. I want to make this work, to build something lasting here." "Then that is what we will do." He gestured toward the stairs. "Let me show you upstairs. I have water heating in the kitchen that should be warm enough for washing soon, and I can bring up something for you to eat. You must be starving." Katherine followed him up the narrow staircase, acutely aware of his broad shoulders ahead of her, the way he moved with easy confidence through his own home. The upstairs hallway held 2 doors as promised, and he opened the one on the right to reveal a bedroom that was surprisingly pleasant. A large bed with a patterned quilt dominated the space, and a dresser stood against one wall next to a washstand. The window looked out onto what she assumed was the backyard, currently just a white expanse of blowing snow. But the room felt warm and inviting, miles better than the cramped stagecoach or questionable hotel rooms that had housed her during the journey. "It was my mother's room," Kade said quietly, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. "She passed 5 years ago. I have kept it clean but not used. I hope it will be comfortable for you." Katherine turned to him, seeing grief flicker across his features before he controlled it. "I am sorry for your loss. I know that kind of pain." She touched the quilt lightly, appreciating the careful needlework. "This is lovely." "Thank you for preparing it for me," he nodded, backing toward the door as if suddenly unsure of proper behavior. "I will bring up that water and some food. Take your time settling in." Then he was gone, his footsteps retreating down the stairs. Katherine sank onto the bed, her body finally releasing tension it had carried for weeks. She was here. She had survived the journey. The man waiting downstairs seemed decent, honorable even, though she knew people could hide their true natures. But his letters had not lied about the house, had not exaggerated his circumstances, and he had shown consideration for her comfort and reputation. It was more than many mail-order brides could claim. She removed her wet cloak and traveling jacket, draping them over the chair near the window to dry. Her dress beneath was damp but salvageable. When she caught sight of herself in the small mirror above the dresser, she winced at her reflection. Her blonde hair had escaped its pins in wild disarray. Her face was pale except for windburn across her cheeks and nose, and exhaustion shadowed her blue eyes. She looked exactly like someone who had spent 3 weeks traveling through harsh winter conditions, which was accurate even if unflattering. Kade returned shortly with a pitcher of warm water and a basin, along with fresh towels draped over his arm. He set them on the washstand without meeting her eyes, clearly trying to be respectful. "Food will be ready in about 20 minutes. Nothing fancy, just beef stew that has been simmering. But it is hot and filling." "That sounds wonderful," Katherine said honestly. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper hot meal. Stagecoach stops offering mostly cold fare or questionable quality. He paused at the doorway, turning back with visible effort. "I know today has been overwhelming. Tomorrow might be too. But I want you to know that I am glad you came, Katherine. Whatever else happens, I am glad you took the chance." Before she could formulate a response, he was gone again, leaving her alone with those unexpected words warming her more effectively than the fire or hot water. She washed quickly, the warm water feeling glorious against her cold skin, and changed into a clean dress from her trunk. She attempted to fix her hair into something presentable, achieving a simple bun that at least looked intentional. By the time she made her way downstairs, following the scent of cooking food, she felt marginally more human. The kitchen was larger than the front room, with a substantial iron stove that radiated heat, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, and windows that probably offered nice views when not obscured by blizzard conditions. Kade stood at the stove, ladling stew into 2 bowls with economical movements that suggested he was accustomed to taking care of himself. He had removed his coat, revealing a work shirt and vest that showed his lean, muscular build, the physique of someone who spent his days doing physical labor. "Sit, please," he said, gesturing to the table. "There is bread too, only a day old, so still decent." Katherine settled into one of the chairs, accepting the bowl he placed before her with murmured thanks. The stew smelled incredible, rich with beef and vegetables, seasoned properly. She took a cautious bite and could not suppress a small sound of appreciation. It was delicious, better than she expected from a bachelor rancher, and desperately needed after so long without quality food. Kade sat across from her with his own bowl, watching her eat with what appeared to be satisfaction. "I learned to cook after my mother died. It was either that or starve or waste money eating in town every meal. I am not skilled at baking yet, so the bread comes from the mercantile, but I manage most other things well enough." "This is excellent," Katherine assured him between bites. "Truly." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against bowls and the howl of wind outside. It was strange, sitting here with this man who was essentially a stranger, sharing a meal in his kitchen while a blizzard raged beyond the walls. Yet it felt less awkward than Katherine anticipated, perhaps because they were both too exhausted for pretense. "Tell me about the ranch," she said eventually, wanting to fill the silence with something other than her own spiraling thoughts. "Your letters mentioned cattle, but not much detail about the operation." Kade leaned back in his chair, cradling his coffee cup. "I run about 200 head right now, which is modest but manageable with hired help during busy seasons. The ranch covers 600 acres, with good grazing and access to water from Laramie Creek. I inherited the land from my father, who homesteaded here in '65. He and my mother built this house, established the herd, made it all work despite the challenges." "It must have been difficult losing them both," Katherine ventured. His jaw tightened briefly. "My father died in '73, kicked by a horse he was breaking. Broke his neck, instant. My mother lasted 2 more years before her heart gave out. The doctor said it was weak, a condition she had probably carried for years. But I think losing my father broke something in her that never healed." He met Katherine's eyes across the table. That is why I understand what you wrote about grief, about losing your family. That kind of loss changes you. Katherine nodded, her throat suddenly tight. My mother simply faded after my father died. She stopped eating properly, stopped caring about anything. The doctor called it melancholia. I called it a broken heart. And your father's debts forced you to consider this, Kade said quietly, not quite a question. Yes. He was a good man but terrible with money. When he died, I discovered he owed nearly everyone. I sold everything to settle what I could, but it was not enough. I was going to lose the house anyway, and I had no prospects, no way to support myself adequately. She straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. I want to be honest with you. I did not choose this solely out of romantic notions. I needed a way forward, and your letters suggested you might be someone I could build a decent life with. Rather than looking offended, Kade nodded slowly. I appreciate your honesty, and I will return it. I did not advertise for a wife because I was dying of loneliness, though I was lonely. I need a partner to make this ranch everything it can be. Someone to manage the house, help with planning and decision-making, eventually raise children if we are blessed with them. The winters here are brutal, and facing them alone gets harder each year. He paused, then added with quiet intensity, but I also wanted someone I could talk to, laugh with, someone who might become more than just a practical arrangement. Your letters suggested you might be that person. The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable in a way that made Katherine's chest ache. She had not expected this level of candor, this immediate willingness to acknowledge the complicated truth of their situation. Most men, she imagined, would maintain pretense, would insist on romance or convenience without admitting the messy reality between. I hoped for that too, she admitted softly. Something real, even if it starts from unusual circumstances. Kade's expression warmed, a real smile finally breaking through his serious demeanor. Then we are starting from the same place, which seems like a good foundation. He stood, collecting their empty bowls. You should rest. You look ready to collapse, and I suspect tomorrow will be overwhelming in its own way as you get oriented. Katherine could not argue with that assessment. Exhaustion dragged at her limbs, making even sitting upright feel like an effort. She helped clear the table despite his protests, then retreated upstairs to the bedroom that was hers, at least temporarily. The wind still howled outside, rattling the windows, but the house felt solid and warm, a refuge against the storm's violence. She changed into her nightgown and slipped beneath the heavy quilt, her body sighing with relief at finally being horizontal in a real bed. Through the floor, she could hear Kade moving around downstairs, the sounds of him banking the fire and preparing his own makeshift sleeping arrangements. Katherine closed her eyes, letting exhaustion pull her toward sleep, her last conscious thought that perhaps this desperate gamble might work out after all. She woke the next morning to weak sunlight filtering through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind what appeared to be several feet of fresh snow blanketing everything in pristine white. Katherine dressed quickly in the cold air, choosing a practical wool dress in deep blue and braided her hair in a simple plait. When she descended to the kitchen, she found Kade already dressed for the day, standing at the window with a cup of coffee in hand, surveying the winter landscape with a rancher's evaluating eye. He turned when she entered, his gaze taking her in with the same intensity as the previous evening. "Morning, how did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," Katherine admitted, accepting the coffee cup he poured for her. "That bed is wonderfully comfortable. Good. I was worried the wind might keep you awake. It gets loud up there during storms." He gestured to the window. "We received about 2 feet overnight, which is significant but not catastrophic. I need to check on the cattle, make sure none got separated from the herd or trapped somewhere dangerous. I have a hired hand, Thomas, who lives in the bunkhouse out back. He will be expecting me. Katherine felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of being left alone so soon, but she pushed it down. She was not some helpless city girl, even if the circumstances were unfamiliar. "What should I do while you are gone?" Kade studied her for a moment. "Whatever you like. Explore the house, rest more, cook something if you are inclined, or you could come with me if you are interested in seeing the operation. I warn you it is cold and messy, but you mentioned in your letters wanting to understand the ranch work." The invitation surprised and pleased her. Many men would expect their wives to remain firmly within the domestic sphere, uninterested in the business that supported them. "I would like that. I should see what I will be part of." His smile was warm and approving. "Then dress in your warmest things. We leave in 20 minutes. Katherine hurried upstairs to layer additional clothing, blessing her foresight in bringing wool stockings and her heaviest cloak. When she returned, Kade handed her a pair of boots that he explained had belonged to his mother, lined with fur and substantially more appropriate for deep snow than Katherine's own shoes. They fit reasonably well with thick socks, and she felt more prepared to face the Colorado winter. The cold hit like a slap when they stepped outside, stealing her breath despite her preparations. But the sun shone in a brilliantly blue sky, turning the snow-covered landscape into something beautiful and otherworldly. Kade led her around the house to a barn and several outbuildings, all constructed with the same solid craftsmanship as the house. A man emerged from one of the buildings as they approached, bundled in layers of clothing and wearing a hat pulled low over his ears. "Thomas, this is Katherine Sullivan, my intended," Kade called out. "Katherine, Thomas Miller has worked with me for 3 years, best hand in the territory." Thomas touched his hat brim, his weathered face breaking into a grin that made him look younger than his 40-some years. "Pleasure to meet you, miss. Congratulations on surviving that blizzard journey. That took some grit." "Thank you," Katherine replied, warming to his friendly manner. "I am glad to meet you too." The three of them checked the cattle, which had clustered near a windbreak of trees and seemed to have weathered the storm acceptably. Kade and Thomas discussed moving hay to certain areas, checking water sources that might have frozen, and planning for the next potential storm. Katherine listened and watched, trying to absorb the complex reality of ranch management. It was clear that Kade knew his business thoroughly, that he cared deeply about his animals and land, and that he worked hard to maintain everything properly. As they walked back toward the house later that morning, Kade glanced at her with concern. "You are not too cold. Your face is red." "I am cold," Katherine admitted, "but I wanted to see this to understand what you do. It is impressive, Kade. You have built something substantial here." His expression pleased at the compliment. "It is a good operation with room to grow. With help with a partner, it could be even better." The implication was clear, that he saw her as that potential partner, and Katherine felt something warm bloom in her chest despite the frigid air. They spent the rest of the day settling into a tentative rhythm. Kade showed her the root cellar, the smokehouse, the various storage areas where he kept supplies to survive long winters. Katherine took inventory of the kitchen, planning meals with what was available, and began to make the space feel more organized according to her preferences. They worked around each other carefully, polite and considerate, like dancers learning new steps. That evening they sat by the fire after dinner, the comfortable silence occasionally broken by conversation. Kade told her about the town, the neighbors, the social structure of Fort Collins. Katherine shared stories from Philadelphia, her childhood, her father's bookshop that had been her favorite place in the world. They discovered shared interests in reading, both having somewhat unusual education for their respective situations. Kade's mother had been a teacher before marriage, and had ensured her son learned beyond basic literacy, while Katherine's father had considered education essential for everyone, regardless of gender. "What made you answer my advertisement specifically?" Katherine asked eventually, curious about his decision-making process. "You must have had other responses." Kade nodded slowly. "I received 11 letters total. Most were brief, practical women in desperate situations looking for any escape. Which is understandable, but it did not give me much sense of who they were as people." He met her eyes across the firelit room. "Your letter was different. You told me about your parents, about loss, but also about what you hoped for in life. You asked questions about the ranch, about Colorado, about my interests. You wrote like someone looking for a genuine connection, not just a transaction." Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "I almost did not send that letter. It felt too revealing, too honest. I thought you might prefer someone more reserved." "I am glad you sent it exactly as you wrote it," Kade said quietly. "It made me hope we might actually suit each other beyond the practical necessities." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and tentative connection. Then Kade stood, breaking the spell gently. "I should let you rest. Tomorrow I thought we could go into town if the roads are passable, let you meet some people and see Fort Collins properly." Katherine nodded, rising as well. "I would like that." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Kade, for being patient with all of this, for making it easier than it might have been." His smile was soft in the firelight. "Thank you for coming, for taking the chance. I know it was not easy." They stood there for a moment longer, the space between them feeling simultaneously vast and insignificant. Then Katherine forced herself to turn toward the stairs, to climb up to her borrowed room, even as part of her wanted to stay in the warm circle of firelight and continue talking until dawn. The next 3 days passed in similar fashion, a gentle dance of growing familiarity. The weather cleared enough for a trip to town, where Kade introduced Katherine to what felt like every resident of Fort Collins. She met Reverend Mitchell and his wife Sarah, who welcomed her warmly and spoke about the wedding ceremony with friendly enthusiasm. She met the mercantile owner, the banker, several ranching families, and various townspeople who all seemed genuinely pleased that Kade had found someone. The attention was overwhelming but touched her deeply. This ready acceptance into a community that could have been suspicious of a mail-order bride from the East. Katherine also began to notice things about Kade that his letters had not conveyed. The way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size, how his rare smiles transformed his serious face, the patience he showed with animals and people alike. She noticed how the townspeople respected him, sought his opinion, trusted his word. She saw his kindness in small gestures like warming her cloak by the fire before they went outside, or leaving wildflowers on the kitchen table that he must have dug from beneath the snow somewhere. For his part, Kade seemed to be learning Katherine equally carefully. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read, something like wonder mixed with cautious hope. He listened when she talked, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in her opinions about ranch matters and other topics. He laughed at her dry observations about some of the more colorful townspeople they met, a deep, rich sound that made her want to be amusing more often. On the 4th evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Kade cleared his throat in a way that signaled something significant was coming. Katherine set down her mending and gave him her full attention, heart suddenly beating faster. "I know we agreed to take time before making things official," he began, his hands clasped loosely between his knees as he leaned forward in his chair. "And I do not want to rush you or make you feel pressured, but I wanted to say that these few days have been good, Katherine, better than I hoped. You fit here in this house, in this life, with me." He raised his eyes to meet hers. "If you are willing, I would like to speak with Reverend Mitchell about performing the ceremony soon, but only if that is what you want to." Catherine's breath caught in her chest. She had been feeling the same pull, the same sense of rightness settling into her bones. Yes, it was fast by conventional standards, but their entire situation defied convention. And she had learned enough about Kade Kendrick in 4 days to know he was everything his letters suggested and more. He was kind, hardworking, honest, and thoughtful. He treated her with respect and consideration. And beneath the practical foundation, she felt the stirring of something deeper, an attraction that was both physical and emotional, the potential for real love given time to grow. "I would like that," she said softly, then stronger. "Yes, Kade. I think we should make this official. I want to build this life with you." The relief and joy that flooded his expression made her chest tight. He stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were at eye level. "I will do my best to make you happy, Katherine. To be a good husband, to build something lasting with you." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek with one calloused hand. "I know it is too soon for big declarations, but I want you to know that I already care for you, more than I expected to this quickly." Katherine leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. "I care for you too. I did not think this could feel like more than a business arrangement so quickly, but it does. It feels like the beginning of something real." Kade's thumb brushed across her cheekbone in a feather-light caress. "May I kiss you? I have wanted to since you stepped off that stage looking fierce and frozen." Catherine's laugh was breathy but genuine. "Yes." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, until his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of restrained promise. Catherine's eyes drifted closed as she leaned into him, one hand coming up to rest against his chest, where she could feel his heart pounding as rapidly as her own. The kiss remained chaste, appropriate for their situation, but it sparked warmth through her entire body that had nothing to do with the fire crackling nearby. When they separated, Kade rested his forehead briefly against hers, his breathing slightly uneven. "I will speak with the Reverend tomorrow. Would Saturday work for you? That gives us 2 more days to be certain." Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice immediately. Saturday felt right, enough time to prepare, but not so long that nerves could undermine the decision. They had already chosen each other through letters and desperation and hope. Now they were choosing each other again with more information, more certainty, and that felt significant. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah Mitchell took Katherine under her capable wing, helping her prepare for the ceremony and offering advice about married life in the Colorado Territory. Several ranch wives visited, bringing food and small gifts, their presence a blessing that eased Katherine's anxiety about being accepted. She altered her best dress, a deep green silk that had survived the journey relatively unscathed, adding new trim and making it suitable for a wedding. It was not the elaborate gown she might have imagined in a different life, but it was pretty and appropriate, and when she tried it on the night before the ceremony, she felt beautiful. Kade spent the 2 days completing ranch tasks with almost manic energy, as if trying to ensure nothing would require attention during the days immediately following their marriage. He cleaned the house thoroughly, brought in extra firewood, stocked the kitchen, and generally ensured everything was prepared. Thomas teased him mercilessly about acting like a nervous bridegroom, which Kade acknowledged with surprising good humor. Saturday arrived with clear skies and temperatures cold but manageable. Katherine dressed carefully that morning, her hands trembling slightly as she pinned up her hair in a more elaborate style than usual. When she descended the stairs, she found Kade waiting in the front room wearing what was clearly his best suit, dark and well-fitted, his hair still damp from washing and carefully combed. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and his expression when he saw her made every anxiety worth it. "Katherine," he breathed, his eyes widening, "you look absolutely beautiful." She felt heat rise in her cheeks but smiled, genuinely pleased. "You look very handsome yourself." They rode into town together in Kade's wagon, the winter morning crisp and bright around them. Katherine's stomach fluttered with nerves, but Kade's solid presence beside her provided steadiness. This was happening. In an hour she would be married to a man she had known for less than a week in person, binding her life to his in the eyes of God and the law. It should have felt terrifying, and part of her was certainly frightened. But a larger part felt right about this decision, felt like she was stepping into a future that might actually contain happiness. The church was small but well-maintained, with beautiful wooden pews and windows that let in the winter sunlight. Reverend Mitchell waited at the front, his kind face creased in a welcoming smile. Sarah sat in the first pew, along with Thomas and several other townspeople who had come to witness the ceremony. It was not a large gathering, but their presence made it feel official and important rather than hasty or shameful. Katherine and Kade stood before the reverend, hands joined, and spoke their vows in clear voices that only trembled slightly. The traditional words felt weighty, promises that Katherine fully intended to honor even as she marveled at the surreal quality of the moment. When Kade slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hand steady and warm, her throat tightened with unexpected emotion. This was real. She was married now, bound to this good man, embarking on a life she could barely imagine. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Mitchell announced with warm approval. Kade cupped Katherine's face in both hands and kissed her softly, a promise of tenderness and consideration. The small congregation erupted in applause and well wishes, breaking the solemnity with joyful noise. Katherine found herself pulled into hugs by Sarah and the other women, congratulations and advice flowing freely. The men clapped Kade on the back, making jokes that brought color to his face but also made him laugh. They signed the marriage certificate in the church office, making everything legal and official. Katherine stared at her new signature, Kade Kendrick, the letters looking strange but also thrilling. She had a new name, a new life, a new future stretching ahead with this man who was now her husband. The celebration continued at the hotel dining room, where Sarah had organized a wedding breakfast with contributions from various townspeople. Food appeared from multiple sources, far more elaborate than Katherine expected, and the atmosphere was festive and warm. People shared stories about Kade, his parents, the history of his ranch, painting a picture of the community Katherine had joined. She felt welcomed in a way she had not experienced since losing her own family, and it eased something in her heart she had not realized was still wounded. Eventually, as afternoon approached, Kade caught her eye across the room with a look that sent pleasant shivers down her spine. He made their excuses gracefully, thanking everyone for their kindness and support, then guided Katherine out to the wagon where he helped her up, before climbing aboard himself. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them processing the magnitude of what they had just done. When they arrived home, Kade jumped down and came around to help Katherine, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her to the ground. But instead of releasing her immediately, he held on, looking down at her with serious eyes. "Are you all right? Not having regrets already?" Katherine shook her head firmly. "No regrets, are you?" His smile was answer enough, but he said anyway, "None at all, wife." The words sent warmth cascading through her. Wife. She was someone's wife now, and the man claiming that connection was good and kind and treating her like something precious. "Then let us go inside, husband, before we freeze out here." The house felt different when they entered, though nothing physical had changed. It felt more like theirs rather than his with her visiting, a subtle shift in belonging. Kade built up the fire while Katherine hung up their coats, both of them moving around each other with new awareness. The rest of the day and the approaching night loomed before them, full of expectations and unknowns that made Katherine's heart race. Kade seemed to sense her nervous energy because he caught her hand as she passed, tugging her gently to face him. "Katherine, I want you to know that we can take this as slowly as you need. I know today has been overwhelming, and being married legally does not mean you owe me anything you are not ready to give." His consideration made her eyes sting with grateful tears. Many men would not be so patient, would consider marriage vows as granting them immediate rights regardless of their wife's comfort. "Thank you for saying that. But Kade, I am not afraid of you or of what being married means. I am just nervous because this is all new and I want things to be good between us." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt safe and warm. "It will be good between us. Maybe not perfect immediately because we are still learning each other. But we will figure it out together." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "I care about you, Katherine. Your comfort and happiness matter to me." She stretched up on her toes and kissed him, putting into the gesture all the emotion and gratitude and affection building in her chest. Kade responded with gentle intensity, his arms tightening around her as the kiss deepened beyond their previous chaste exchanges. Katherine's hand slid up his chest to his shoulders, feeling the strength there, the solid reality of this man who was now her husband. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Kade's eyes had darkened with desire that sent answering heat pooling low in Katherine's stomach. "Let me cook us dinner," Kade said, his voice rougher than normal. "Something simple, and we can talk, continue getting to know each other. Then later, if you want, we can figure out the rest as we go." Katherine nodded, appreciating his approach of treating the evening as something natural rather than putting pressure on specific expectations. They worked together to prepare a meal, moving around the kitchen with increasing ease. Katherine found herself laughing at Kade's story about one of his cattle getting stuck in a fence, and the way he told it with self-deprecating humor made her affection for him deepen. After dinner, they moved to the front room, sitting together on the sofa rather than in separate chairs, a deliberate choice toward increased intimacy. Kade told her more about his plans for the ranch, asking her opinions and seeming genuinely interested in her thoughts. Katherine shared her ideas about improving the house, adding small touches that would make it feel more like a home, and Kade encouraged every suggestion enthusiastically. As full darkness fell outside and the fire burned low, the conversation drifted into comfortable silence. Kade's arm was around Katherine's shoulders, and she was tucked against his side, feeling his warmth and strength. When he turned his head to look down at her, the question in his eyes was clear, even unspoken. "Yes," Katherine whispered, answering what he had not asked aloud. "I am ready." Kade stood, offering his hand to help her up, then led her toward the stairs. Her heart pounded as they climbed together, anticipation and nerves warring in her chest. When they reached the bedroom that had been hers, Kade paused in the doorway. "This is your space. We can stay here or move to my room, or I can sleep elsewhere tonight, whatever you prefer." Katherine appreciated the choice he was offering but had already made her decision. "Here is fine. It is our room now, not just mine." His smile was brilliant, transforming his face with joy and relief. They entered together, and Kade closed the door softly behind them, granting them privacy from the rest of the house. The single lamp provided warm, low light that softened everything. Katherine felt suddenly shy despite her certainty, unsure of the practicalities now that the moment had arrived. Kade seemed to sense her hesitation because he approached slowly, giving her time to adjust. "We will go slowly. If you want me to stop at any point, just say so. I promise I will listen." She nodded, appreciating his reassurance. When he kissed her this time, it was with barely restrained passion, his control evident in the tension of his body even as he kept his touch gentle. Katherine responded with growing confidence, letting instinct guide her as her hands explored the broad planes of his back through his shirt. She felt him shudder beneath her touch, heard his breath catch, and felt powerful knowing she could affect him this way. They helped each other undress with fumbling but tender hands, the process feeling less awkward than Katherine expected, because Kade kept whispering reassurances and compliments that made her feel beautiful despite her vulnerability. When they finally came together in the bed, skin against skin, the intimacy was almost overwhelming in its intensity. Kade kept his promise to go slowly, paying attention to her responses, adjusting to her comfort, making the experience something they shared rather than something he took. There was some discomfort for Katherine, which Kade apologized for even though she assured him it was expected and bearable. But there was also pleasure, connection, the profound sensation of becoming one with another person in the most fundamental way. When it was over, they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, both breathing hard, Kade pressing gentle kisses to Katherine's temple and hair while murmuring soft words of praise and affection. "Are you all right?" he asked eventually, concern evident in his voice. Katherine nodded against his chest, feeling simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. "Yes, more than all right. That was wonderful, Kade." She felt his tension ease at her words, his arms tightening around her. "I am glad. I wanted it to be good for you, not just something you endured." "It was definitely good," she assured him, tilting her head up to kiss his jaw. "I am happy, husband, truly happy." His answering smile was visible even in the dim lamplight. "I am happy too, wife, happier than I expected to be when I wrote that advertisement months ago." They talked quietly for a while longer, sharing whispered confidences and gentle touches, before exhaustion pulled them both toward sleep. Katherine drifted off feeling safe and warm, wrapped in her husband's arms, marveling at how quickly her life had transformed. A week ago, she had been on a stagecoach dreading an uncertain future. Now she was married to a good man, living in a comfortable home, part of a community that had welcomed her. It felt almost too good to be real, like a dream she might wake from. But when morning came, she woke to find it was not a dream at all. Kade was still beside her, sleeping peacefully, his face relaxed in a way that made him look younger. Katherine took the opportunity to study him properly in the early light filtering through the window. He really was handsome, with strong features and thick dark hair that was mussed from sleep. But more than physical appearance, there was something fundamentally good about him that shone through in unguarded moments like this. As if sensing her regard, his eyes opened, focusing on her immediately. His smile was slow and warm and intimate in a way that made her stomach flutter. "Good morning, Mrs. Kendrick." "Good morning, Mr. Kendrick," she returned, feeling her own smile bloom. They spent the morning in bed, talking and laughing and discovering each other with new freedom. When they eventually rose and dressed, moving through the house together, everything felt different. This was truly their home now, their life together, and Katherine felt a bone-deep contentment she had not experienced in years. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to their days. Kade worked the ranch with Thomas, checking cattle, mending fences, planning for spring operations. Katherine managed the house, learning to cook larger quantities for when hired hands would arrive for spring work, preserving food supplies, making the space more comfortable and personalized. But they also worked together often, Kade teaching Katherine about ranch operations, and Katherine sharing her knowledge of bookkeeping, which helped organize his somewhat chaotic financial records. They grew closer daily, learning each other's habits and preferences, navigating small disagreements with patience and humor, building trust through consistent kindness and respect. The physical intimacy between them deepened as well, Katherine's initial nervousness giving way to confidence as she learned what pleased them both. Kade was an attentive and generous lover, taking pleasure in her pleasure, making her feel desired and cherished in ways she had not imagined possible. Winter maintained its grip on the Colorado territory through February and into March, bringing several more significant storms that kept them housebound for days at a time. But Katherine found she did not mind being snowbound with Kade. They spent those forced indoor days reading aloud to each other, playing cards, talking endlessly about everything and nothing, making love in front of the fire when the cold made the bedroom less appealing. The isolation that might have felt oppressive instead felt intimate, a chance to cement their bond without external distractions. One evening in late March, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Kade pulled Katherine into his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against his chest, comfortable and content, watching the flames dance. "You remember what I said when you arrived?" Kade asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Katherine thought back to that chaotic first evening, trying to recall his exact words through the blur of exhaustion and cold and overwhelming newness. "You said several things. Which one?" "I do not think I actually said it out loud, but I thought it." He tightened his arms around her. "I thought that winter would not be cold anymore, not with you here, that you would be warmth and light in the dark months." Katherine's heart swelled at the sweet sentiment. She twisted in his arms to face him, cupping his face in her hands. Did it work out that way?" His smile was tender, his eyes soft with love that he had started expressing more freely in recent weeks. "You were exactly that. You made this house a home, made the isolation feel like intimacy, made everything better. I love you, Katherine. I think I started falling the moment you stepped off that stage looking fierce and frozen and determined." She had been waiting for those words, hoping for them, but hearing them still made her eyes well with happy tears. "I love you too, Kade. I did not expect to, not this deeply or this quickly. But you are everything good and kind and strong. You make me happy in ways I did not think were possible after losing my family." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, conveying with actions what words could not fully express. When they separated, both breathing harder, Kade rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you for taking the chance, for getting on that stagecoach despite the risk and uncertainty. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for writing that advertisement, for choosing my letter, for being exactly who you promised to be in your words." Katherine smiled through her tears. "Thank you for saying winter would not be cold anymore. You were right." They made love there in the firelight, slow and tender and full of expressed emotion, sealing their declarations with physical intimacy. Afterward, as they lay tangled together on the rug, Katherine felt completely at peace. She had traveled so far, risked so much, desperate for a new start. And she had found not just security or survival, but actual happiness, genuine love, a partner who valued her and treated her as an equal. As spring finally arrived in the Colorado Territory, bringing warmer temperatures and the promise of new growth, the ranch came alive with increased activity. Kade hired additional hands for spring operations, and the house filled with the sound of men working, horses moving, cattle calling. Katherine rose to the challenge of feeding everyone, organizing supplies, managing the domestic operation to support the ranch work. She discovered she was good at it, capable and efficient, earning respect from the hired hands through her competence and fair treatment. She also began to explore Fort Collins more thoroughly, developing friendships with other ranch wives and townswomen. Sarah Mitchell became a particular friend, the two women bonding over shared interests and similar sensibilities. Katherine helped with church activities, contributed to community gatherings, and found herself welcomed fully into the social fabric of the area. It was different from Philadelphia, less formal and more practical, but she appreciated the genuine warmth and mutual support that characterized frontier communities. One afternoon in early April, as Katherine worked in the kitchen preparing supper, she felt a wave of nausea that had become familiar over the past week. She paused, pressing a hand to her stomach, acknowledging what she had begun to suspect. Her monthly courses were late, unusually so, and combined with the morning sickness and unusual fatigue, the signs pointed to an obvious conclusion. She was almost certainly pregnant, carrying Kade's child less than 2 months into their marriage. The realization filled her with complex emotions. Joy at the prospect of a baby, of creating a family with Kade, of seeing him as a father. But also anxiety about childbirth in frontier conditions, worry about being a good mother, fear of loss given how many women and children did not survive the experience. She wanted to tell Kade immediately, but also wanted to wait until she was certain, until she had seen the doctor and confirmed her suspicions medically. She made it through supper without revealing anything, though Kade gave her several concerned looks when she picked at her food. After the hands had been fed and the kitchen cleaned, Katherine found Kade in the barn checking on a horse that had shown signs of lameness earlier. He looked up when she entered, his face lighting with pleasure at seeing her, which made her heart squeeze with affection. "Everything all right?" he asked, setting down the horse's hoof and straightening. Katherine took a deep breath, deciding that waiting served no purpose when she was already reasonably certain. "I think I might be pregnant. I cannot be completely sure yet, but the signs are there." Kade's eyes widened, his expression cycling through surprise, joy, and concern in rapid succession. "Pregnant? Really? Are you certain?" He crossed to her quickly, hands gentle on her shoulders. "Not completely certain without a doctor's confirmation, but fairly sure. My courses are late and I have been feeling sick in the mornings." She searched his face anxiously. "Are you happy about it? I know it is very soon." His laugh was somewhat strangled but genuinely joyful. "Happy, Katherine, I am thrilled, nervous as hell but thrilled." He pulled her into a careful embrace as if she had suddenly become fragile. "A baby, our baby. I cannot quite believe it." Katherine relaxed into his arms, relieved by his obvious happiness. "We should see the doctor to be sure, and to make sure everything is progressing normally." "We will go tomorrow," Kade agreed immediately. "First thing. And you need to rest more, not work so hard. We will hire someone to help with the house if needed." "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Katherine protested, though she was touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies while running households for all of history." "Other women are not my wife carrying my child," Kade countered, his hands sliding to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "I want you safe and healthy, both of you." The tenderness in his voice, the obvious love and care in his expression, made Catherine's eyes prickle with tears that she blamed on emotional fluctuations from pregnancy. "We will be fine, but I promise to be sensible and not take unnecessary risks." They visited Dr. Carlson the next day, and he confirmed what Katherine already knew. She was approximately 6 weeks pregnant. Everything appeared normal and healthy, and if all went well, they could expect a baby in early November. The doctor gave her advice about diet and rest, warned about danger signs to watch for, and assured Kade that his wife was healthy and capable of handling pregnancy and childbirth without wrapping her in cotton. The ride back to the ranch was filled with excited planning and wondering. Would the baby be a boy or girl? What names did they like? How should they prepare the house for a child? Kade's enthusiasm was infectious, his obvious joy at the prospect of fatherhood making Katherine fall even more deeply in love with him. As her pregnancy progressed through spring and into summer, Katherine bloomed with health despite the persistent morning sickness that eventually faded. Her body changed, her stomach rounding noticeably by July, and Kade treated each development with wondering reverence. He would rest his hand on her belly, feeling for movement, his face lighting up with pure joy when the baby kicked strongly enough for him to feel. He talked to her stomach, telling their unborn child about the ranch, the cattle, the beautiful Colorado landscape, making Katherine laugh at his serious narration. The community rallied around them with typical frontier generosity. Women brought baby clothes and supplies, offering advice based on their own experiences. Men helped Kade prepare one of the upstairs bedrooms as a nursery, building a cradle and other necessary furniture. The support and excitement from their friends and neighbors made Katherine feel deeply grateful for the community they had become part of. As autumn arrived and her due date approached, Katherine found herself simultaneously eager and anxious. She wanted to meet their baby, to see Kade hold their child, to begin the next chapter of their life together. But she was also frightened of the birth itself, the pain and danger that came with bringing new life into the world. Women died in childbirth regularly, and babies died even more frequently. No amount of preparation or positive thinking could eliminate those risks. Kade seemed to sense her growing anxiety because he became even more attentive as November neared. He stayed closer to home, ensuring he was never far away, and arranged for Dr. Carlson to be available on short notice. Sarah Mitchell agreed to assist with the birth, her calm presence and experience having helped many other women through delivery. Everything was as prepared as possible, yet Katherine still felt the fear lurking beneath her excitement. The labor started on a cold November morning, just after dawn, when Katherine felt the first cramping pains that signaled her body was beginning the process. She woke Kade, who immediately went from asleep to completely alert, his face paling slightly but his actions calm and efficient. He sent Thomas to fetch Dr. Carlson and Sarah while staying with Katherine, helping her through the early contractions with steady presence and murmured encouragement. Sarah arrived first, taking charge of the situation with cheerful competence that helped Katherine relax marginally. The doctor arrived an hour later, examining Katherine and pronouncing everything progressing normally. Then began the long, exhausting process of labor, hours that blurred together in waves of pain and brief respites. Kade stayed with her despite Sarah's suggestion that he might prefer to wait elsewhere, his hand gripping Katherine's as she struggled through each contraction. "You are so strong," he whispered during one of the brief rest periods, wiping sweat from her forehead with a cool cloth. "So incredibly strong. Our baby is going to have the most amazing mother." Katherine was too exhausted to respond properly, but she squeezed his hand, grateful for his presence even as she crushed his fingers during the worst contractions. The pain was unlike anything she had experienced, all-consuming and seemingly endless. But Sarah and Dr. Carlson provided steady guidance, telling her when to push and when to rest, monitoring the baby's progress with professional expertise. Finally, as afternoon faded toward evening, Katherine felt the overwhelming urge to push combined with Sarah's excited announcement that the baby was crowning. She bore down with every ounce of strength she possessed, Kade's voice in her ear telling her she could do this. She was almost there, just a little more. And then suddenly, there was release and relief, and the sharp cry of a newborn filled the room. "It is a boy," Dr. Carlson announced, holding up the squalling infant for them to see before passing him to Sarah for cleaning. Strong and healthy by the sound of those lungs. A boy. They had a son. Katherine collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as Sarah wrapped the baby in a soft blanket and placed him in Katherine's arms. He was red-faced and furious, tiny fists waving, utterly perfect. Katherine stared down at him in wonder, hardly believing this small person was real, was theirs, was the physical manifestation of the love between her and Kade. Kade leaned over them both, his own eyes wet with tears he made no attempt to hide. "He is beautiful. Perfect. Katherine, you did it. You are amazing." He touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, and their son immediately grasped it with surprising strength, making Kade laugh wetly. "Strong grip. He is going to be a rancher." Dr. Carlson finished attending to Katherine, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy and in excellent condition. Sarah cleaned up the room, organized supplies, and provided instructions for the coming days while Katherine and Kade remained focused entirely on their son, learning his small face, marveling at his tiny features. "What should we name him?" Katherine asked softly, unable to look away from the baby in her arms. Kade was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. "I would like to name him after my father if you are agreeable." "Kenneth. Kenneth Kendrick." Katherine smiled, touching the baby's soft cheek. "Kenneth, I like it. Hello, Kenneth." "Welcome to the world, little one." The baby, as if recognizing his name, settled in her arms, his cries fading to small snuffling sounds. His eyes, dark and unfocused, seemed to look toward them, and Katherine felt her heart expand with a love so intense it was almost frightening. This was her son. Their son. A whole new person to love and protect and raise. The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming, but also filled with profound joy. Katherine recovered from the birth more quickly than expected, though she was grateful for the help Sarah organized from other community women. They brought food, assisted with chores, and provided advice and encouragement that made the adjustment easier. Kade was a hands-on father from the beginning, changing nappies without complaint, walking the floor with Kenneth when he fussed at night, staring at his son with such obvious adoration that it made Katherine's heart swell. As winter settled over the ranch again, Katherine found herself thinking back to that first winter when she arrived as a mail-order bride to a stranger's house. How terrified and uncertain she had been, how overwhelming everything seemed. Now, just over a year later, she sat in a comfortable chair by the fire with her husband beside her and their son asleep in her arms, feeling contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking?" Kade asked softly, noticing her emotional expression. Katherine smiled at him, this man who had become her whole world. "I am thinking about how you told me winter would not be cold anymore after I arrived. You were right, but in ways neither of us could have imagined then. You made me a home, gave me love, created a family with me. You made everything warm and bright and good." Kade reached over to cover her hand with his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "You did that too. You brought life and warmth into this house, into my life. I was existing before you came, but I was not really living. You changed everything, Katherine." They sat together in peaceful silence, watching their son sleep, listening to the wind howl outside while remaining warm and safe within their home. The blizzard conditions that had greeted Catherine's arrival no longer seemed ominous, but rather appropriate, as if the universe was providing dramatic staging for their story. She had arrived in a blizzard as his mail-order bride, desperate and uncertain, but willing to take a chance on a future that promised more than survival. And Kade had been right in that unspoken thought he shared with her months later. Winter was not cold anymore when you had love to warm you from within, family to fill your home with light and sound, purpose that went beyond mere survival. The Colorado winters would always be harsh and long, but inside their house, within their growing family, there was warmth enough to last a lifetime. As the months passed, and Kenneth grew from infant to chubby baby who smiled and laughed at everything, Katherine and Kade's bond only deepened. They navigated the challenges of parenthood together with patience and humor, supporting each other through sleepless nights and teething struggles. The ranch continued to prosper under their combined management. Kade's knowledge of cattle and land complemented by Katherine's organizational skills and financial acumen. They talked often about the unlikely path that brought them together, marveling at the series of circumstances that led a Philadelphia woman and a Colorado rancher to find each other through letters and necessity. But they both agreed it no longer mattered how they started, only where they were going together. Spring brought new life to the ranch again, and Katherine discovered she was pregnant a second time. News that thrilled them both even as they joked about having their hands full soon. Kenneth was toddling around getting into everything with the fearless determination of an 18-month-old, keeping them constantly busy. But the chaos felt joyful rather than overwhelming, evidence of a full and happy life. One evening that spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Kenneth playing at their feet with wooden blocks Kade had carved, Katherine leaned against her husband's shoulder with deep satisfaction. "I never imagined my life would look like this," she said quietly. "After losing my parents and facing destitution, I thought my best hope was survival, maybe security if I was lucky. I never dared dream of actual happiness, of love and family and purpose." Kade wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "I never imagined it either. I thought I would manage the ranch alone, maybe find someone to share the work and eventually have children. But I did not expect to find a true partner, someone I love so completely it still surprises me sometimes." Katherine turned her face up to kiss him softly. "We were both looking for practical solutions and found something extraordinary instead. The best things often come from unexpected places," Kade agreed, his hand settling gently on her stomach where their second child grew. "You arrived in a blizzard looking half frozen and wholly determined, and I knew immediately you were going to change my life. I just did not realize how completely or how wonderfully." Kenneth toddled over to them demanding attention, and they both laughed as Kade scooped him up, tossing him gently in the air to squeals of delight. Katherine watched her husband and son play, her hand resting on her growing belly, and felt gratitude so intense it was almost overwhelming. She had taken an enormous risk boarding that stagecoach, traveling into unknown territory to marry a stranger. But that risk had given her everything she had lost and more than she had dared hope for. The second baby arrived that November, a daughter they named Victoria after Katherine's mother. Kenneth was fascinated by his tiny sister, wanting to constantly touch her soft hair and hold her with careful supervision. The house rang with children's laughter and crying, with the controlled chaos of a growing family, and Katherine thrived in the midst of it all. She had feared after losing her parents that she would never have family again, never know that sense of belonging and connection that makes life meaningful. But here in Colorado, with Kade and their children, she had found family again, built it from determination and hope and love that grew stronger every day. The years rolled forward, bringing challenges and triumphs, hard winters and beautiful springs, struggles and successes. More children arrived, 2 more sons and another daughter, until their house overflowed with noise and activity. The ranch expanded as Kade had dreamed, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. A success built on his knowledge and Katherine's management working in perfect harmony. They became pillars of the Fort Collins community, raising their children with the same values of hard work, kindness, and resilience that had brought Katherine and Kade together. Through it all, they maintained the deep connection forged in those early days when they were strangers learning to be partners. They still talked by the fire in the evenings when they could steal quiet moments, still made each other laugh, still looked at each other with love and desire that time only intensified rather than diminished. Their children grew up seeing what real partnership looked like, what love built on mutual respect and genuine affection created. Katherine never forgot that desperate, frightened woman who stepped off the stagecoach into a blizzard, gambling everything on letters and hope. But she also did not regret a single decision that led her to that moment. Every hardship, every loss, every difficult choice had been necessary to bring her to Kade, to this life, to the family and love that made everything worthwhile. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children grown or nearly so, Katherine and Kade sat together on that same porch where they had spent countless evenings watching sunsets and planning futures. The Colorado landscape stretched around them, familiar and beloved, home in the deepest sense of the word. "You remember what you told me after Kenneth was born?" Kade asked, taking Katherine's hand in his. "About winter not being cold anymore." Katherine smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I remember. You said I brought warmth and light into your life, made winter bearable. You brought more than that," Kade corrected gently. "You brought everything. Love, family, partnership, happiness I did not know existed. You transformed my entire world, Katherine, not because you arrived, but because of who you are and what we built together." She turned to kiss him, the gesture as natural and comfortable as it was passionate and meaningful after 25 years of marriage. "We both did that. We took a desperate arrangement and turned it into something real and lasting and good. We took a practical solution and created a love story." Kade pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders, both of them watching the sun set over land they had worked together for decades, in a house filled with memories of children raised and love deepened. "The best love story," he agreed. "The kind that starts with a blizzard and a scared woman taking an enormous risk on a stranger's promises. And a lonely man hoping the stranger he chose from letters might be someone special," Katherine added. "We found each other against all odds, and we built this incredible life from determination and hope and growing love." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, the Colorado sky filling with stars that seemed close enough to touch. Inside the house, their adult children who had come to celebrate the anniversary were talking and laughing, and the sounds drifted out to them like music. This was what they had created together, the legacy of 2 people who took chances and worked hard and loved deeply. Katherine thought back one more time to that terrified woman on the stagecoach, unsure if she was making the worst mistake of her life or the best decision possible. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would work out better than she could imagine. that the serious-eyed rancher waiting in the blizzard would become the love of her life, her partner in every sense, the father of her children and the keeper of her heart. But that woman had taken the chance anyway, even without guarantees, even frightened and grieving and desperate. And that courage, that willingness to risk everything for the possibility of something better, had made all the difference. "I love you," Katherine said softly, the words as powerful now as they had been the first time she spoke them, more than 2 decades earlier. "I love you too," Kade responded immediately, his voice warm with emotion and certainty. "Today, tomorrow, and all the winters and springs to come. You made my life complete, Katherine. You made winter warm and summer sweet and every day in between worth celebrating." She smiled against his shoulder, comfortable and content and deeply, profoundly happy. The blizzard that greeted her arrival all those years ago had seemed like an omen, a warning that she was making a terrible mistake. But it turned out to be the beginning instead, the dramatic opening to a love story that would span decades and create a family and build a legacy that would last generations. Winter was not cold anymore when you had love like theirs to warm you. And summer was even better when you had a partner to share the sunshine with, to work beside and laugh with and build dreams into reality. Katherine had arrived in a blizzard as his mail-order bride, desperate and uncertain but willing to hope. And Kade had been right in that unspoken promise that he eventually shared. She brought warmth that lasted far beyond that first winter, warmth that filled their home and their lives with light and love that nothing could diminish. Their story, which began with such uncertainty and risk, had become exactly what both of them needed it to be, a testament to courage and hope, and the transformative power of love built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. And as they sat together under the stars, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created, both Katherine and Kade knew they would do it all again exactly the same way. Because sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards, and sometimes desperate gambles turn into the best decisions you ever make. Sometimes a blizzard brings exactly what you need, even if you do not recognize it until you are warm and safe on the other side, looking back at where you started and marveling at how far you have come. Katherine arrived in a blizzard and found a home, a love, a family, and a future that exceeded every hope she dared carry with her on that desperate journey west. And Kade found the partner he needed, the love he deserved, and the family he dreamed of, all because one frightened, brave woman decided to take a chance on a stranger's letters and the promise of something better. Their story was complete now, their circle closed with love and family and years of shared experiences. The mail-order bride who arrived frozen and uncertain had become the strong, confident matriarch of a thriving family. The lonely rancher who advertised for practical assistance had found a true partner and deep love. And together, they had created something lasting and beautiful, proof that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the happiest of endings when two people are willing to work together, hope together, and love each other through all the seasons of life.